While the lawyer read the will, the silence in that room pressed down like a hand on the chest. Nadia's cousins had already received their inheritances. Griffin, a controlling share in the family's commercial real estate portfolio, and Portia, a full stake in the Corwell investment fund. But when Nadia's turn came, attorney Declan Fosse crossed the room and placed two things in her open palm: a $1 coin and a small brass key worn smooth at the edges. He cleared his throat and read the words her father had left. "This is everything she needs." The laughter started before he finished the sentence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Corwell family did not grieve quietly. When Ellsworth Corwell died on a Tuesday morning in late October, his two nephews and their families, Griffin Saville, 34, and his sister Portia Saville, 31, had already begun making calls by that afternoon. Not to the pastor, not to the funeral home, to their lawyers. Nadia learned of her father's death from voicemail. She was at work, a mid-level drafting position at a small civil engineering firm in Columbus, when her phone buzzed on her desk. The message was from Griffin, clipped and efficient. "Your father passed this morning. The will reading is Friday at the estate. Be there at 10. That was the whole message. She sat at her desk for a long time after that. The office moved around her, keyboards, coffee, the low hum of a printer, and she stayed still in the middle of it, one hand flat on the surface in front of her. Ellsworth Corwell was 67 years old when he died. To most of the family, he had always been the odd branch of the tree. Nadia's father, the one who didn't care much for suits or boardrooms, who spent his evenings in a workshop the family had never been invited into, who talked about engineering problems the way other men talked about sports. He had a modest house on the east side of Caldwell, Ohio, a 15-year-old pickup truck, and a reputation among the Savilles as the relative you tolerated at Christmas but never consulted on anything that mattered. What the Savilles knew about Ellsworth Corwell could fit on a single note card. What they did not know would take considerably longer to explain. Nadia had grown up watching her father dismissed. She had also grown up watching him work. On weekends, when she was a girl, he would take her out to Fenwick Road, a long gravel track that cut through the tree line east of town, and they would spend hours in the workshop he kept there. She never fully understood what he was building in those years. She was too young, but she understood the care he took, the precision of his hands, the way he would stop mid-sentence when an idea struck him and reach for the nearest pencil. He treated problems the way some people treated puzzles, not with frustration, but with a kind of patient pleasure. When Nadia was 14, her mother moved them to Columbus to be closer to her own family. The distance made visits harder. By the time Nadia was in college, trips to Caldwell were down to holidays and occasional weekends. After she graduated and started working, even those thinned out. But she and her father talked on the phone. Long calls, sometimes about her projects at work, about the civil engineering concepts she was learning, about the way water moved through soil and how bridges distributed load. He listened with the attention of someone who had thought about similar things for decades. That was the last time she saw him in person. The will reading was held in the main library of the Corwell estate, a property that had belonged to Ellsworth's father before him, and which Griffin and Portia had been lobbying to inherit for years. They had arrived early. By the time Nadia walked in at 5 minutes to 10, the room had already taken on the atmosphere her cousins preferred. Catered coffee on the sideboard, Portia in a cream blazer with her phone out, Griffin standing by the window with the posture of someone who had already rehearsed his reaction to good news. Nadia wore a plain black dress. She took a seat near the back. Declan Fosse, her father's attorney for over 2 decades, entered at 10 exactly. He was a careful man, measured in his movements, with the kind of face that gave nothing away until it had to. He set his briefcase on the table, removed a single folder, and began. Griffin received first. The Corwell Commercial Real Estate Holdings, 3 buildings in downtown Caldwell, 2 in Columbus, 1 in Cincinnati. He pumped his fist before Fosse had finished the sentence. Portia received second. The Corwell Investment Fund, a portfolio that had been quietly compounding for 30 years. She exhaled in a long, satisfied breath and reached over to squeeze her brother's arm. Then Fosse reached into the briefcase and removed a small brown envelope. He walked across the room to Nadia. He opened the envelope. Inside was a dollar coin and a brass key on a plain steel ring. He placed them in her hand. Then he read from the document in front of him. This is everything she needs. The room took about 2 seconds to process it. Then Griffin started laughing. A real laugh, the kind that bent a person forward. $1, he said. He left you $1 and a key. He looked at Portia. What does the key open? A storage unit. Portia walked over slowly. She looked at the key in Nadia's palm the way someone looks at a parking ticket someone else received. Sweetheart, she said, if you need help with rent this month, just say so. Fosse's voice cut in. The will includes a 30-day vacate provision for non-primary heirs currently residing on the property. 30 days. Griffin turned away from his sister. She's not staying 30 days. She doesn't live here. She drove in from Columbus. He looked at Nadia. You can leave today. Now, we're not running a hotel. Fosse began. The document specifies. I know what it specifies. Griffin's voice had the edge of someone who had already decided. This estate belongs to us. She has an hour. Nadia looked at Fosse. His expression stayed level, the way it had been since he walked in. The primary heirs have the right to establish residency terms, he said carefully. I would recommend. An hour, Griffin repeated. Nadia stood. She went upstairs to the small room she had used on visits. Not her childhood room. She had never lived in this house, but the one that had always been hers to use. She took the photograph from the dresser. Her and her father at his workbench, taken 2 summers ago. Both of them looking at something off to the left of the frame, something one of them had apparently just said that was either funny or interesting enough that neither of them was looking at the camera. She put in her bag. She was back downstairs in 40 minutes. Griffin was waiting near the front door. He held out a black trash bag. For whatever else you need to carry, he said. She took the bag. She put the photograph inside. She walked out. Nadia did not ask where they were going. She got in the passenger seat of Fosse's car, a dark green sedan, older, clean, and set the trash bag on the floor between her feet. The rain moved across the windshield in slow diagonals. Neither of them spoke for the first few minutes, and she found she did not need them to. She was thinking about her father, not the will reading, not Griffin's laugh or the trash bag or the rain. She was thinking about a specific afternoon when she was 9 years old, sitting on an overturned milk crate in the Fenwick Road workshop while her father stood at his workbench with a piece of copper tubing and a set of calipers, measuring the same section 4 times. She had asked him why he measured it so many times if the number kept coming out the same. He had looked over at her with an expression she would spend the rest of her life trying to describe. Patient, amused, completely unbothered by the question. Because the 4th time, he said, I'm not checking the measurement. I'm checking myself. She had written that down when she got home. She was 9. She wrote it in a notebook she kept in her dresser drawer, in the careful handwriting of a child who understood that certain things needed to be kept. Ellsworth Corwell was born in Caldwell, Ohio, the younger of 2 brothers. His older brother, Martin, Griffin and Portia's father, had been the one the family groomed for business. Martin went to a good school, joined the right firm, married well, and spent 30 years building the Corwell commercial portfolio that Griffin had just inherited without having contributed a single brick to it. Martin died 4 years ago, and the Saville cousins had been circling Ellsworth's share of the family assets ever since. What they had never understood and never thought to ask about was how Ellsworth had spent those same 30 years. He had not gone to a prestigious school. He had gone to a state engineering program on a partial scholarship, graduated in the middle of his class, and then done something that baffled his family entirely. He had turned down 2 job offers and gone back to Caldwell. He bought a parcel of land on Fenwick Road, 12 acres of mixed timber and cleared field, and he built a workshop on it. A real one, not a garage with tools. A working facility with a concrete floor, climate-controlled storage, proper ventilation, and enough electrical capacity to run serious equipment. The family's read on this was that Ellsworth had always been a little strange, and the workshop was simply the physical form that strangeness took. A grown man playing in a shed. They left him to it. What they missed, what everyone missed because Ellsworth had no interest in correcting them, was that he was not playing. He was working. He had been working with the focus and consistency of someone who had decided early what he wanted to build and had simply gotten on with building it. The workshop on Fenwick Road was not a hobby. It was a 40-year research and development operation run by one person, structured with the kind of legal precision that most people associate with large corporations and not with quiet men in rural Ohio. Nadia had understood pieces of this. The weekend visits as a child had given her the texture of it. The organized shelving, the labeled storage, the logbooks her father kept in a row along the back wall, each one dated and indexed. She had understood that he took his work seriously. What she had not understood, until that weekend 3 years ago, was the scale of what he had accumulated. He had walked her through the workshop on that visit with a deliberateness she now recognized as intentional. He had shown her the filing system, the way the patents were organized, the structure of the holding entity he had set up to protect his intellectual property. He had explained, in his unhurried way, how the licensing agreements worked, how the royalty structures were written, what the subsidiary relationships looked like on paper. She had listened carefully, the way she always listened to him, and she had asked good questions, and he had answered them, and at the time she had filed it all away as an interesting afternoon with her father. She understood now that it had been a class. A single, carefully designed session in the curriculum he had built for her across her entire life. Every phone call about load distribution and fluid dynamics. Every weekend in the workshop as a girl. Every question he had ever encouraged her to ask and then refused to answer too quickly. He had been teaching her the language she would need to read what he had left her. The car turned off the main road. A gravel track opened up ahead, cutting through the tree line, and Nadia recognized it before the headlights found the sign. Fenwick Road. She looked down at the brass key in her hand. The metal was warm from being held. He talked about you constantly, Fosse said, without looking away from the road. Every time I saw him, for 20 years, he talked about you. Nadia did not answer. Outside the window, the trees closed in on both sides, and the workshop came into view through the rain. The building was larger than she remembered. That was the first thing she noticed. Not because it had changed. Fosse would later confirm that nothing structural had been altered since the late 90s, but because the last time she had stood in front of it, she had been 9 years old, and 9-year-olds measure the world against themselves. Now she stood at the edge of the gravel apron in the October rain and looked at a long, low structure of dark timber and corrugated steel that ran the full width of a cleared lot, backed by dense Ohio hardwood that had gone amber and copper in the fall. A covered porch ran the length of the front face. The windows were narrow and high, designed for light without exposure. It looked exactly like what it was, a place built by someone who cared more about what happened inside it than about what anyone passing by might think. Fosse cut the engine. "There is someone waiting inside," he said. "Her name is Harriet Munns. She has been maintaining this property for 11 years. Your father trusted her completely." Nadia nodded. She picked up the brass key, got out of the car, and walked through the rain to the porch. The front door was heavy, solid wood with a steel plate at the base, and the lock was a serious one. Not decorative, not residential. She slid the key in. It turned without resistance, the way a well-maintained lock does, smooth and certain. The door opened inward on a rush of warm air that smelled like machine oil and cedar and, very faintly, like the particular dry paper smell of old documents kept in good conditions. A woman stood just inside. She was in her mid-60s, compact and upright, with short gray hair and the kind of steady hands that suggest a person has spent a long time working with them. She wore a canvas apron over a flannel shirt. She looked at Nadia for a moment with an expression that was not quite a smile, but contained one somewhere behind it. "You look like him," she said. "Around the eyes, mostly." "Harriet Munns?" Nadia said. "Yes." She stepped back from the door, coming out of the rain. The interior opened up in a way the exterior did not prepare you for. The front section was a long workroom, benches down both sides, tools organized on pegboard with an almost military precision, each outline labeled in her father's handwriting. The labels were worn at the edges, years old, but the tools were clean and correctly placed. Every one of them. A long central aisle ran to the back of the room, where a second set of doors stood closed. Track lighting ran along the ceiling beams. The concrete floor had been sealed and was spotless. Along the left wall, from floor to ceiling, ran the logbooks. 41 of them, she would later count, dated consecutively. The first one started in March of 1983. Nadia stood in the middle of the room and turned slowly. He kept it exactly as he left it, Harriet said. His instructions were very specific about that. Nothing moved, nothing removed, nothing added. My job was maintenance and security. I've had the heat and dehumidification running on schedule since he got too sick to come out himself. How long was that? Nadia asked. About 14 months. He drove out as often as he could in the early part. Then it got harder. Harriet paused. He talked about you on those last visits. He said you would come, and that when you did, I should give you this. She crossed to the nearest workbench and picked up an envelope. Plain white, unsealed, with Nadia's name written across the front in her father's handwriting. The precise, slightly forward-leaning print of an engineer who had spent decades writing on technical drawings. Nadia took it. She did not open it immediately. She held it in both hands and looked around the room again, at the logbooks, at the tools, at the narrow, high windows with the rain running down the outside of the glass. Then she sat down on the stool at the nearest bench, the way she had sat on the milk crate as a child, and she opened the envelope. There were 2 pages inside, handwritten on graph paper, both sides. She read slowly. Nadia, if Declan has brought you here, then everything has gone the way I planned it. I am sorry for the way the day has probably gone. I designed it to be difficult, and I want to explain why, though I suspect by now you have already worked most of it out. Your cousins are not bad people. They are people who were never asked to be anything other than what they became. The family gave them the appearance of value, buildings, accounts, a name, and they accepted it and stopped there. I do not blame them. I blame the lesson they were taught, which is that inheritance is something you receive rather than something you earn by becoming worthy of it. I could not leave what I built to people who would not understand it. Not because I wanted to punish them, but because what I built requires someone who can think in systems, who can see how the parts connect, who values the work itself rather than the number it produces. I watched you become that person. I watched it for 30 years. The key you are holding opens this building, but the building is not the inheritance. The inheritance is in the filing room behind the second doors. Harriet knows the combination. What you will find there will take time to understand fully. Declan will help you with the legal structure, and there's a man named Brennan Show who has been managing the operational side and is expecting your call. There are things in that room that will surprise you. Let them. One more thing. The dollar coin is not symbolic. Look at the edge. I love you. I always have. That was never complicated. Dad. Nadia sat with the letter in her hands for a long time. Harriet stood near the door and did not hurry her. Fosse had come in quietly behind them and taken a position near the wall, his briefcase at his feet, giving her the room she needed. When she finally looked up, her eyes were dry. She had cried enough in the rain outside the estate. In here, something else had taken over. The same focused attention her father had modeled for her across an entire lifetime, the posture of someone looking carefully at a problem they intend to solve. The second doors, she said to Harriet. Harriet nodded and moved toward the back of the room. The filing room was not what the name suggested. Nadia had picture cabinets. Rows of them, the kind you find in county offices and law firms, gray metal with small plastic label holders. What she found when Harriet entered the 6-digit combination and pulled the second doors open was something closer to a purpose-built archive, a room roughly 40 feet deep and climate-controlled to a temperature that hit her skin like a cool hand, with walls lined in deep wooden, shelving from floor to ceiling, and a central table of pale birch running the length of the space. Track lighting ran overhead. The air had the particular stillness of a room that had been carefully sealed and carefully maintained for a very long time. The shelving held binders. Hundreds of them, organized by year and category, their spines labeled in the same precise print as the tool outlines in the outer workshop. Patent filings, license agreements, technical specifications, correspondence, financial records, a complete institutional memory maintained by one man, covering 4 decades of work. Along the far wall, separated from the binders, were the prototypes. They sat on open shelving behind a low railing. Physical objects, some of them recognizable as components of larger systems, others less immediately legible. Machine parts, circuit assemblies, sealed units with specification plates riveted to their housings. Each one tagged with a date and a reference number that corresponded to a binder on the opposite wall. Nadia walked to the central table. On it, arranged with the deliberateness of something recently placed rather than long stored, were 3 items. A single binder marked Overview, a prepaid mobile phone with a yellow sticky note attached that read Brennan. Call when ready, and a smaller envelope. This one sealed, marked Legal Summary, Fosse. Fosse stepped forward and took his envelope. He opened it at the table, read for a moment, and then set it down with the careful movement of someone confirming what they already knew. Your father was thorough, he said. It was not a throwaway comment. He said it the way you say something that has taken years to fully appreciate. Nadia picked up the overview binder. The first page was a single-typed sheet, undated. At the top, her father had written one line, "Start here. Take your time. There is no deadline." Below, it was a structural summary of everything the room contained. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Ellsworth Corwell had spent 40 years building a body of work that the family had collectively dismissed as an old man's hobby. What the overview binder documented was something else entirely. He had developed, patented, and licensed a series of proprietary systems across 3 industrial categories: logistics routing optimization, manufacturing process controls, and commercial property management software that had been quietly embedded into the operational infrastructure of the Corwell family businesses for over 15 years. He had not done this accidentally. He had done it with a precision that Nadia, reading the summary sheet, recognized as the same precision he brought to everything. The Corwell commercial real estate portfolio that Portia now believed she owned outright ran its tenant management, lease administration, and maintenance scheduling through a software platform license from a private entity called Corwell Applied Systems. The license was annual, renewable, and non-transferable. Griffin's newly inherited logistics holdings operated on a routing algorithm that reduced fuel costs and delivery times to a degree that represented the difference between profitability and loss, an algorithm owned by the same entity and licensed on identical terms. The manufacturing interests connected to the broader Corwell family assets ran process controls that had been integrated so deeply into daily operations that removing them would require a full systems rebuild. Corwell Applied Systems was wholly owned by a holding structure her father had established in 2004. The holding structure had a single beneficiary, named in the original trust instrument and unchanged since the day it was written. Nadia set the binder down. She looked at Fosse. He built the infrastructure they depend on. Over a long period of time, yes. The integrations happened gradually through licensing arrangements that the business managers accepted because the systems worked exceptionally well. No one questioned where they came from. Your father was not the kind of man people thought to question. And the licenses are held by the trust, which you now control. Nadia turned back to the shelving and looked at the rows of binders. 40 years. Phone calls about fluid dynamics and load distribution. Weekends on milk crates, watching careful hands measure the same thing 4 times. A man who had been building something enormous in complete silence, not because he was secretive by nature, but because he understood that the work itself was the point, and the work required patience that most people would not have extended to him if they had known what he was building. She picked up the prepaid phone. The sticky note said Brennan, call when ready. A number was written below the name in her father's handwriting. She looked at Harriet. You've met him? Several times. He drove out here twice a year to go over the operational reports with your father. Careful man. Good listener. Harriet paused. Your father liked him. That is not a small thing. Nadia turned the phone over in her hand. Then she looked at the dollar coin, which she had been carrying in her jacket pocket since the estate. She took it out and examined the edge, the way the letter had told her to. Stamped into the metal, small but deliberate, was a sequence, SAS 001. Corwell Applied Systems. Certificate number 1. The coin was not $1. It was a share certificate, the only one in existence for the entity that controlled everything her cousins believed they had inherited. She set it flat on the birch table and looked at it for a moment. Then she dialed Brennan Cho. Brennan Cho answered on the second ring. Miss Corwell. His voice was even unhurried, the voice of someone who had been expecting this call and had decided not to perform relief when it came. I'm glad you found the workshop. How long have you known about me? Nadia asked. Your father mentioned you the first time we met. That was 9 years ago. He described you as the only engineer in the family who didn't know she was one yet. A brief pause. He meant it as a compliment. I took it as one on your behalf. Nadia sat down at the birch table. Harriet had moved quietly to the outer workshop, giving her the room. Fosse remained near the door, present but unobtrusive, the way a good attorney learns to be when the client needs to think. Tell me what you manage, she said. Everything operational. Your father handled the design and the legal architecture. I handle the systems that run day to day, license monitoring, renewal schedules, client communications, technical support for the integrated platforms. I have a small team. For people, all remote, all vetted personally by your father before he brought them on. None of them know who owns the holding structure. They know the work, and they do it well. The Corwell businesses. How embedded are the systems? Brennan took a moment before answering, not because he was uncertain, but because he was choosing the right level of precision. The logistics routing platform has been the operational core of the Corwell Freight Division for 11 years. Removing it would not be a software migration. It would be a rebuild from the ground up, and during that rebuild, the division could not function at commercial scale. The manufacturing process controls are similarly integrated. They were designed to be not out of malice, but because a system that can be easily removed is a system that can be easily devalued. Your father understood that the work had to be load-bearing to be worth protecting. And the real estate platform? Lease administration, tenant communications, maintenance scheduling, compliance tracking. The property managers who use it have been on it for 8 years. Most of them have never used anything else. Portia Saville now technically owns the buildings, but the buildings are administered through a platform she has no access to and no licensing rights for. She owns the walls. Your father's system runs everything inside them. Nadia was quiet for a moment. Through the narrow, high windows, the rain had lightened to a gray drizzle, and the October light was doing what October light does in Ohio in the late afternoon, turning amber and then beginning to let go. What happens when the licenses come up for renewal? She asked. The logistics license renews in 31 days. Manufacturing in 44. Real estate in 60. Your father timed it deliberately. He wanted the situation to become clear to your cousins at a pace that gave them enough time to understand what was happening, but not enough time to build an alternative. He thought of everything. He spent a long time thinking about it, Brennan said. There was something in the way he said it. Not reverence exactly, but the particular respect of someone who has watched a person work with sustained care over many years and understood what that costs. He revised the transition plan 4 times in the last 3 years. Each revision was more precise than the last. Nadia looked at the CAS 001 coin on the table. He never told them. The cousins. They used these systems for over a decade and never asked where they came from. People rarely ask where functional things come from. They ask when they stop working. That landed with a quietness that Nadia recognized as true. She had seen in her own work. The infrastructure that nobody thinks about until it fails, the systems that become invisible precisely because they do their job. Her father had understood that dynamic and had built it into his plan with the same care he brought to everything else. I need time to go through the binders, she said. The overview is clear, but I want to understand the full structure before I make any decisions. Your father anticipated that. He said, and I am quoting directly because he made me write it down, that you would want to see the whole board before you moved a single piece. Nadia almost smiled. How long do I have before the cousins start noticing problems? Griffin's logistics division will begin experiencing routing inefficiencies within the next 2 weeks as the system enters its pre-renewal notification phase and certain optimization functions throttle back automatically. It is a built-in feature of the license structure. a grace period warning that the licensed operator would normally use to initiate renewal. Since Griffin is not the licensed operator and does not know the system exists as a licensed platform, he will interpret it as a technical failure and begin firing people. And Portia? She has already sent 3 emails to the property management addresses demanding access to the administrative backend of the tenant platform. The auto-response she is receiving directs her to contact the license holder for access credentials. She has sent follow-up emails to the same address, calling it a glitch. Fosse made a quiet sound near the door that might have been the beginning of a laugh. Nadia pulled the overview binder toward her and opened it to the second page, which was a structural diagram of the entire holding architecture. Entities, relationships, licensing chains, all of it mapped in her father's careful hand. "I'll call you again in 3 days," she said to Brennan. "Once I've been through the full binders. I want to understand every moving part before anything changes." "Understood." Another pause. "Miss Corwell, your father built this for you specifically. Not for theoretical air. For you, the way you think, the way you work. You will find that it fits." She looked at the diagram in front of her. It did fit. That was the thing. Reading it felt less like learning something new and more like recognizing something she had been taught incrementally across 3 decades, piece by piece, in a language she had not known she was learning until this moment. 3 days, she said, and ended the call. 3 days became 3 weeks. Nadia did not leave Caldwell. She had packed for a single overnight. The trash bag from the estate contained almost nothing useful. A change of clothes, her charger, the photograph. But Harriet, without being asked, had prepared the small apartment above the workshop's rear storage section. It had a bed, a bathroom, a kettle, and a window that looked out over the back field toward the tree line. Her father had built it years ago, Harriet said, for long working weekends when driving back to the house was not worth the interruption. Nadia slept there the first night without deciding to. She simply sat at the birch table reading through binders until well past midnight. And when she finally stood up and looked at the time, driving back to Columbus felt like a different life entirely. She started at the beginning. Binder 1, March of 1983, her father 26 years old and 18 months out of his engineering program. The handwriting slightly less settled than what it would become, but already precise, already organized in the same system he would use for the next 4 decades. The earliest entries were design notes, component sketches, material calculations, early stage thinking on problems he had identified in industrial logistics systems that he believed could be solved better. There were dead ends in those early binders. Approaches he had tried and abandoned, documented without embarrassment, annotated with brief explanations of why the direction had not worked and what the failure had clarified. She recognized the methodology. It was the same one he had modeled for her on the milk crate at 9 years old. The 4th measurement is not checking the number. It is checking yourself. By binder 6, she had reached the mid-90s, and the work had sharpened considerably. The dead ends became less frequent. The design notes gave way to more formal documentation, patent applications, correspondence with a Columbus law firm, early licensing conversations with companies she recognized. By binder 12, she could see the architecture beginning to take its final shape. The holding structure her father was assembling piece by piece with the patience of someone who understood that the legal framework around a thing determined whether the thing survived beyond its maker. She called Brennan at the end of each day. The calls were working sessions, not briefings. She asked specific questions, and he answered them specifically. And when she identified something in the binders that she did not fully understand, he walked her through it without condescension, the way her father had always done. By the end of the first week, she had mapped the complete licensing architecture. By the end of the second, she had gone through every active agreement and understood each one on its own terms. On the morning of the 19th day, she called Brennan and told him she was ready to talk about what came next. "Before we do," he said, "you should know that Griffin Saville has contacted our general inquiry address 3 times in the last week. Not the automated tenant platform address. The general inquiry address for Corwell Applied Systems, which is listed in the public patent registry. He has not identified himself by name in any of the messages, but the IP address traces to the Corwell estate. What does he want?" The first message asked about licensing terms for the routing platform. The second asked about the ownership structure of the entity. The third asked for a meeting with whoever is in charge. Brennan's tone was even. He does not know what he has found. He thinks he has found a vendor. He does not yet understand that he has found the source. Nadia was at the birch table with a coffee and the last of the binders open in front of her. Outside, the field behind the workshop had gone from amber to bare, the trees stripped down to their November architecture, clean lines against a low gray sky. And Portia, she has hired a technology consultant to investigate the property management platform. The consultant has identified that the system is externally licensed and has advised her that she needs to contact the license holder to negotiate continued access. She's apparently under the impression that this is a standard vendor relationship and that the conversation will be straightforward. How are the businesses performing? Brennan went through it methodically. Griffin's logistics division had experienced a 14% drop in routing efficiency over the previous 2 weeks as the pre-renewal throttling continued. 3 regional managers had been let go. A 4th had resigned. Customer complaints had increased, and 2 mid-sized contracts had been placed on review. The division was still functional but visibly degrading, and the people inside it knew something was wrong even if they could not identify what. Portia's real estate situation was more immediately acute. 2 commercial tenants had withheld rent payments after receiving conflicting communications about who their actual landlord was, the shell company Portia owned or the entity whose name appeared on their original lease agreements. Her consultant had escalated the inquiry and was now waiting on a response that would not come through normal channels. The manufacturing interests had gone quiet in a way that suggested internal crisis management rather than resolution. They're losing money every week, Brennan said. Not catastrophically yet, but the trajectory is clear to anyone reading the numbers, and your cousins are now reading them very carefully. Nadia closed the last binder. She set her coffee down and looked at the CIS 001 coin, which had sat on the corner of the birch table since the first night, a fixed point in the changing landscape of the past 3 weeks. Her father had given her a key and a coin and a letter that said, "Let things surprise you." The surprises had been large, and they had kept coming, and she had let each one land before she moved on to the next. That was the discipline he had taught her. See the whole board. She could see it now. Set up the meeting, she said. Both of them together. Neutral location, conference room, professional setting. Give them a week's notice so they can't claim they were ambushed. She paused. And Brennan, don't tell them who they're meeting. The conference room was on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Columbus that Nadia had selected specifically because it belonged to neither family. A commercial rental, booked through one of the subsidiary entities, neutral in every way that mattered. Floor-to-ceiling windows on the south wall. A long table of dark wood. 8 leather chairs that nobody had ever developed any particular feeling about. She arrived 90 minutes early. Fosse came with her, and Brennan had driven up from Cincinnati the night before and was already in the room when they arrived, a laptop open in front of him and a neat stack of folders arranged along the center of the table. He stood when Nadia walked in, and they shook hands in person for the first time. He was compact and careful in his movements, somewhere in his late 40s, with the unhurried quality of someone who had learned long ago that rushing produced worse work. He looked at her the way people look at someone they have formed an accurate mental picture of and are now confirming. Your father described you well, he said. You've said that before. It keeps being true. Nadia set her bag down and walked to the window. Columbus spread out below in the flat November light, the kind of Midwestern city view that is neither beautiful nor ugly, but simply honest about what it is. She had worked in this city for 11 years, driven these streets, eaten lunch in buildings she could see from where she stood, built a modest and competent professional life that had felt, until 3 weeks ago, like the whole of what she had. She thought about the woman who had stood at the iron gate in the rain with a trash bag and a brass key. The distance between that woman and this window was not 3 weeks. It was 40 years of her father's work, and a lifetime of his attention, and one carefully designed afternoon in a workshop on Fenwick Road when she was 31 years old, and he had walked her through a filing system she had not yet understood she would need. At 10 minutes to 2, Fosse's phone buzzed. He looked at it. They're in the lobby. Nadia went to her chair at the head of the table and sat down. Brennan closed his laptop. Fosse moved to the chair to her right. The room settled into the particular quiet of a space where something is about to happen. She heard them before the door opened. Griffin's voice in the corridor, saying something to Portia in a low tone that carried the edge of someone who had been irritated for weeks and was managing it poorly. Then the door opened and they came in, and the room changed the way rooms change when the wrong people enter them. Griffin was in a suit that fit well, but looked like it had been put on aggressively. He was scanning the room as he walked in, the assessment of someone who reads spaces for advantage, and his eyes moved from Brennan to Fosse and then to the head of the table, and he stopped. Portia walked into his back. The silence lasted 4 full seconds. "No," Griffin said. The word came out flat, the instinctive rejection of something the brain has not yet fully processed. "No, absolutely not." "Sit down, Griffin," Nadia said. "You have got to be kidding me." He looked at Fosse. "What is this? What's she doing here?" "Miss Corwell is the principal of Corwell Applied Systems," Fosse said. "She requested this meeting. Please sit down." Portia had recovered faster than her brother. She moved to a chair midway down the table and sat, her face arranged in an expression of careful composure that did not quite conceal the calculations happening behind it. Griffin remained standing for another moment, then pulled out the chair across from Portia and dropped into it with the controlled aggression of someone choosing not to leave. Nadia let the room settle. Then she opened the folder in front of her and began. She did not perform it. She had decided early that this meeting would not be theatrical, not because the situation did not warrant force, but because her father had never been theatrical and the lesson she was here to deliver was his. She walked them through the ownership structure the way she would walk an engineering client through a site analysis. Here is what exists. Here is how it works. Here is what it means for you. The logistics platform, the manufacturing process controls, the property management system, the licensing structure, the holding entity, the renewal dates. She placed documents in front of them at each stage, not to overwhelm, but because she wanted them to see the paper, to understand that this was not abstract, that every line she was describing was filed somewhere and signed by someone and had been in place, in some cases, for longer than they had been paying attention to the family businesses at all. Griffin interrupted twice in the first 10 minutes. The first time she answered him directly and continued. The second time she looked at him without answering and waited until he stopped, and then continued. After that, he did not interrupt again. Portia asked one question, precise and tactical, about whether the licensing structure could be challenged on the basis of undisclosed conflicts of interest within the original business arrangements. Fosse answered it. The answer was no, and the explanation was thorough enough that she did not ask a follow-up. When Nadia reached the end of the presentation, she closed her folder. She reached into her jacket pocket and removed 2 coins. She set one in front of Griffin and one in front of Portia. Dollar coins, the same denomination as the one placed in her hand at the estate, the one her cousins had laughed at 3 weeks ago in a room that smelled like catered coffee and inherited certainty. Griffin looked at his coin. Something moved across his face that was not quite shame and not quite anger, and was probably both. Your businesses are losing money at a rate that becomes unrecoverable in approximately 6 weeks, Nadia said. You have 3 options. You can attempt legal action, which Fosse has already addressed, and which I will not stop you from pursuing at your own expense. You can wait for the licenses to expire and watch the divisions collapse entirely. Or you can sell me the entities, clear your debt, and walk away with something rather than nothing. She paused. My offer is $1 each, the same amount your uncle left his daughter. Griffin stared at the coin in front of him for a long time. The room held its quiet. Outside the 14th floor windows, Columbus moved through its Tuesday afternoon without any awareness of what was happening in this particular room. Trucks on the boulevard below, a flag on the building across the street, pulling at its line in the November wind, the ordinary machinery of a city that did not know or care about the Corwell family and its accumulated failures of attention. Portia spoke first. You would let us walk away. With nothing. With something, Nadia said. $1 each, plus the debt cleared. You walk away without a bankruptcy on your record and without the legal exposure that comes with insolvent entities holding outstanding vendor and employment obligations. That is not nothing. It is considerably better than what you offered me 3 weeks ago. Griffin's jaw moved. That was different. It was not different. You had something you believed was valuable, and you used it. I have something that is actually valuable, and I am using it. The only difference is the direction. He looked at Fosse. There is no legal recourse here. None at all. I have reviewed the structure in its entirety, Fosse said. The licensing agreements are valid and properly executed. The holding entity is correctly registered. The trust instrument is unambiguous. There is no basis for a challenge that a competent opposing counsel would not dismantle in preliminary proceedings. And I say that having spent 2 decades watching your uncle construct this specifically to withstand scrutiny. Portia was looking at her coin. She turned it over once, then set it flat on the table. He planned all of this from the beginning. He planned it for a long time, yes, Nadia said. And you knew. Before he died. I knew less than you think, and more than you gave me credit for. The same way I always did. Portia absorbed that. Something shifted in her face, not quite the composure cracking, but a settling, the way a structure settles when it finally accepts the load it has been carrying. She looked at her brother. Some exchange passed between them that did not require words. The compressed communication of 2 people who have known each other their entire lives and have run out of alternate interpretations. Griffin picked up the coin. He held it between his fingers and looked at it with an expression that had finally let go of the anger and arrived at something quieter and considerably less comfortable. We signed today? He asked. The documents are in the folders in front of you, Brennan said. Standard asset transfer agreements. Your own counsel is welcome to review them. We can reconvene in 48 hours if you prefer. Griffin set the coin down. He pulled the folder toward him and opened it to the first page. He read it. He turned to the second page and read that. Then he picked up the pen that Brennan had placed at the top of the folder and signed where the tabs indicated for signatures in total, without looking up again. Portia signed hers with the deliberate movements of someone making a decision they have already finished making and are now simply recording. When the folders came back to Brennan's end of the table, the Corwell commercial entities, the real estate holdings, the logistics division, the manufacturing interests had transferred to Corwell Applied Systems for the sum of $2, one per entity, paid in the form of the coins that now sat in the center of the table. Nadia did not feel triumph. She had examined the feeling carefully in the weeks since the estate, turning it over the way she had turned the brass key, checking what it actually was. What she felt was something closer to completion. Not satisfaction at her cousin's loss, but the particular quiet that comes when a thing that was designed to work has worked. Her father had built something, and she had learned it, and now it was running, and the lesson it had delivered was the one he had always intended. Griffin stood. He straightened his jacket with both hands, the automatic gesture of a man, reassembling his presentation of himself. He looked at Nadia from across the table with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Something unguarded and uncertain, stripped of the performance. He really thought you were something, he said. It came out without the edge she would have expected. It came out like information, plainly delivered. I know, she said. They left without the ceremony of departure. No handshakes, no parting words from Portia, just the door opening and closing and the sound of the elevator down the corridor. Fosse began organizing the signed documents into his briefcase. Brennan closed his laptop. The room returned to its neutral self, the dark table and the leather chairs that had never developed any particular feeling, the south-facing windows and the flat November light. Nadia picked up the CAS 001 coin from her jacket pocket and set it next to the 2 coins from the meeting. $3 coins on a dark wood table. She looked at them for a moment and then put her father's coin back in her pocket, where it had been since Fenwick Road. The other 2 she left on the table. 6 months later, the workshop on Fenwick Road was running at full capacity. Nadia had moved the operational headquarters of Corwell Applied Systems to the facility, converting the rear storage section into proper offices and expanding the filing room to accommodate the growing team Brennan was assembling. Harriet remained, managing the building with the same quiet competence she had always brought to it, and the two of them had developed the easy working rhythm of people who share a high regard for the same person and have found a practical way to honor it. The Corwell businesses, now consolidated under unified ownership, had stabilized within the first month and begun recovering in the second. Several of the regional managers Griffin had let go were rehired. The tenant disputes Portia had created were resolved through direct communication and modest goodwill adjustments. The manufacturing division, once the licensing issue was resolved and production resumed, turned its first monthly profit under the new structure in April. Nadia did not hold a press conference. She did not post anything. The restructuring was reported in a Columbus Business Journal in a single paragraph that described it as a private consolidation and named no individuals. She had not corrected the record and did not intend to. What she did was work. Every morning she came down from the apartment above the storage section, made coffee in the small kitchen Harriet kept stocked, and went to the birch table in the filing room with whatever problem was next. The logbooks her father had kept were still on the shelves in the outer workshop, all 41 of them, and she had started a 42nd. Same format, same indexing system. Her handwriting was different from his, but the precision was the same, and sometimes, reaching for a pencil to annotate a design note, she caught herself making the gesture exactly as he had made it, the slight lean forward, the unhurried settling of the hand. One evening in late April, Harriet found her at the workbench in the outer workshop, a set of calipers in her hand and a section of copper tubing in front of her, measuring the same point for the fourth time. Harriet watched from the doorway for a moment. "Fourth time," she said. "What are you checking?" Nadia set the calipers down. "Myself," she said. Harriet nodded once, the nod of someone who recognizes a thing they have seen before, and went back to whatever she had been doing, and the workshop settled into its working quiet, and outside the window the field had gone green again, the Ohio spring doing what it does, returning without announcement, without ceremony, simply arriving because it was time. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.